Now on to more news about Afghanistan, and as I said, updates at the beginning. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Pentagon admits Kabul drone strike killed 10 civilians, including 7 children. And the subhead is the military previous claimed it targeted ISIS-K. Dave writes, on Friday, the head of U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, admitted that the August 29th drone strike in Kabul killed 10 civilians, including 7 children, and did not kill any ISIS-K members. As many as 10 civilians and up to 7 children were tragically killed in the strike. Moreover, we now assess that it is unlikely that the vehicle and those who died were associated with ISIS-K, said CENTCOM Commander General Frank McKenzie. Now, of course, a very important part of this is we know that they were not associated by the great reporting that the New York Times did on the ground, as well as some by the Washington Post. And so, you know, the Pentagon is still trying to hedge it a little bit. I guess that way they're diehard supporters who believe that the Pentagon has mythical powers to only kill bad guys can assume that, you know, one of these guys definitely was somehow associated with ISIS-K or something like that. Initially, the Pentagon claimed the strike killed an ISIS-K member and prevented an imminent attack on the Kabul airport. General Mark Milley described the strike as righteous, and the White House said it was successful. But the investigation from the New York Times found the bombing targeted 43-year-old Zamari Ahmadi, an aid worker employed by a U.S. NGO, and killed 9 members of his family. This is further quotes from McKenzie. The strike was taken in the earnest belief that it would prevent an imminent threat to our forces and the evacuees at the airport, but it was a mistake, and I must offer my sincere apologies. He added, fully responsible for this strike and its tragic outcome. Now, you would think that if you are fully responsible for the murder of 7 children and 3 adults, 10 people in total, that you would probably spend the rest of your life in prison. However, this guy didn't even offer up his resignation. And so I'm not, you know, you could say that you're accepting full responsibility, but that's just complete bullshit and a lie. And it is even a greater offense to pretend that you're accepting responsibility when you're not. And again, a sincere apology means absolutely nothing when you slaughter 10 members of a family. This is continuing from David DeCamp's story. In 2015, documents leaked by whistleblower Daniel Hale, who was recently sentenced to 45 months in prison, revealed that during a 5-month period between 2012 and 2013, 90% of the people killed by U.S. drones were civilians. And so while Mark Milley and the U.S. want to pretend that this was just some one-off tragic event that happened, no, this has consistently been what the U.S. drone war has been this entire time. We've been carrying out for 20 years in Afghanistan. And the only thing different, the only thing unique about this strike was that somebody actually bothered to do good reporting on it. And I really do credit the New York Times for putting that out. I'm not trying to like downplay that and be too angry at the U.S. mainstream media, but so many of these strikes just happen in rural Afghanistan. They claim they killed terrorists, and that's all the reporting that happens. That's all they do. They never critically report on it, and most of them go completely unreported on. But if they do, the reporting consists of repeating whatever CENTCOM, AFRICOM, or whatever military general Pentagon spokesperson has said. So rarely do they get reported on. And you know, if somebody actually does travel to the site of the strike, which occasionally happens in Afghanistan or in Somalia or Syria or Yemen, so many times that reporter will find that no, it wasn't Al-Shabaab, it wasn't AQAP, no, it wasn't ISIS-K that was killed. It was innocent people, just children, you know, people going to a wedding, a funeral, going shopping, coming home from work, whatever it may be. And, you know, these you know, in a way I want to call them tragedies, but they're not. These war crimes happen time and time again, and there has been zero accountability. You know, one of the amazing legacies of the U.S. war on terrorism is that, you know, the whistleblowers, Chelsea Manning, Daniel Hale, and John Kiriakou have spent time in prison for exposing the torture program, the drone programs, and war crimes committed by U.S. soldiers, and none of the war criminals have spent a day in prison. It's unbelievably frustrating and angering. I do have a article here up from some statements of the family that was reported by Al Jazeera. I definitely recommend checking out this one. It's running today at antiwar.com, titled "Apology Not Enough," says survivors of U.S. drone strike in Kabul. This is absolutely the case. The victims are demanding accountability, compensation, and relocation, which are all perfectly acceptable things and what the U.S. should be doing. There are several members of this family that lost 10 loved ones in this attack. And again, devastating. Like, probably an entire generation of this family was wiped out by this airstrike, if you don't really want to think of the horror of what the U.S. did here. And so there's not going to be any accountability. I think there's a possibility that the U.S. does go ahead and pay out condolence payments to this family and does relocate them to another country. However, those are, really the minor issues, because without accountability, without people going to jail, these attacks are going to continue to happen. And, that's the real tragedy here, is that this is nowhere near over. The U.S. has continued to assert, Joe Biden has made it very clear that he is not ending the war against ISIS-K in Afghanistan, that he is going to continue the drone war there, that he wants to maintain these over-horizon capabilities. So drone strikes and raids carried out in Afghanistan, where we're going to identify people, just like we did with this strike. They say they watched this guy drive around for 8 hours and couldn't figure that he worked for a U.S. based company. How is that the case? You pretend like you're this massive global empire that could figure anything out anywhere on the face of the planet, and you have a guy driving around Kabul, the capital city of a country the U.S. occupied for 20 years, and he's working for a company based in California, and you blew him up because he loaded water tanks into the back of his car. It's absolutely inexcusable, and there's not major accountability and overhaul. It's going to happen time and time again, and probably already has happened somewhere on earth since this happened. All right, a couple other stories in Afghanistan. One, the Islamic State has claimed credibility or responsibility for an attack in eastern Afghanistan. It happened in Jalalabad, which is the capital of the Nangarhar province, where ISIS-K has mainly operated in Afghanistan over the past half a decade or so. They say that they killed or injured 35 members of the Taliban militia. I'm not exactly sure who that is, and hell, it could have even been regular people or something like that. Just, some Afghans with guns that are more, prefer the Taliban to ISIS-K or whatever, that, they're just claiming that they're members of the Taliban. The Taliban didn't say anything about it, and a source had told Reuters that 3 people were killed. But, it's very interesting that any minor crime by the Taliban, which I'm not saying shouldn't be reported on at all, but when you look and pay attention to the media, there's a very clear narrative that the media is trying to establish that the Taliban are acting violently and that they're dangerous, which isn't necessarily untrue. But at the same time, they're not talking about the fact that it seems that since August 29th, the U.S. has murdered more Afghan children than the U.S. has. So, why isn't that being discussed? Why aren't we trying to have accountability there? Why aren't we making a big deal of this ISIS-K attack? It seems that, there's just a narrative of trying to demonize the Taliban. There's another interesting story that Dave DeCamp has wrote up at antiwar.com. And this one, just like the Woodward stuff, the source is questionable, is Zalmay Khalilzad, who has worked both for Trump and Biden as the ambassador to Afghanistan, who worked out and negotiated the deal with the Taliban in Qatar. And so, maybe he is trying to spin this a little bit so he doesn't look as bad. But I think there are some things that we know happened, in the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, that lead me to believe that this story is probably more or less accurate. And Khalilzad says that he told the Financial Times, that's where this is reported, that the former Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, decided to flee Afghanistan at the last minute, which ruined a deal with the Taliban. Under the deal, the Taliban would not have entered Kabul until they negotiated a political transition with Ghani, but he unexpectedly fled on August 15th, and create a security vacuum that prompted the Taliban to march into the city. Khalilzad said, even at the end, we had an agreement with the Talibs for them not to enter Kabul. And then once Ghani fled, it basically caused the collapse of the Afghan government, and then that created the power vacuum, and the Taliban decided to enter. Now, I guess it's fair to say that maybe the Taliban shouldn't have entered once the power vacuum happened anyways, because there wasn't, at least as far as I could tell, widespread looting going on. However, if the Taliban hadn't entered, who knows, maybe looting could have started. So this is just like a hypothetical thing, but that is something that the Taliban have gotten a lot of criticism for. And actually, I think it was the U.S. bad dictator of Afghanistan, Ghani, who kind of caused the Taliban to end up in Kabul so early. He didn't say, but it has been reported that Ghani was basically stealing a bunch of money, and that's why he left. And, a lot of people have try to speculate as to what Ghani's motives are. I think this guy may just be a crook and was just looking out for number one and saw an opportunity to take off with some suitcases full of money before he, risked being strung up by the Taliban waiting there any longer, and took the opportunity to do so.